78. Ironman Santa Rosa with Matt Fitzgerald. Welcome to the Pursuit of the Perfect Race. I'm Coach Terry Wilson, and with each episode, I bring stories of athletes to you that share their experiences at races in order for you to learn how to have your perfect race. We will hear stories from athletes of all ages, abilities, and races of all distances. So regardless of where you fit in, there's something in there for you. Thanks for spending some time with me today. Now let the pursuit begin. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Pursuit of the Perfect Race. Today I'm talking with author Matt Fitzgerald about his recent race at Ironman Santa Rosa that took place on May 11th, 2019, where the temperature on race day was 54 and rose around 70 degrees. He had an amazing time of 9 hours, 48 minutes, and 6 seconds. Matt, welcome to the show. I really am grateful for your time. Thank you for spending some time with me today.
It's my pleasure.
Nice. So, thank you so much. I really look forward to this. And Santa Rosa, there's so many other Ironmans out there. Why did you pick Ironman Santa Rosa to do?
I picked it mainly because I wouldn't have to fly with my bike to do it. It's this Ironman to where I live in Northern California. There were other things that I liked about it. The one Ironman I'd done previously was Wisconsin, and it seemed like it was similar in that it had a nice lake swim, a fairly challenging bike course, and a run that was relatively spectator friendly. So I liked all of those elements as well.
Nice. So going into this race, we know that you have countless years of experience under your belt racing endurance races. How was your training going into this race?
Mixed. I knew it would be a very big challenge. I hadn't done a triathlon in it was close to 10 years by race day. It was 9 when I decided to commit to doing it. I gave myself plenty of time because I knew I had some big obstacles to overcome in all 3 disciplines. In fact, part of the reason I decided to transition from a running focus to triathlon at that time was that I had a chronic groin injury and just wasn't able to run much. So my running wasn't going well, and that injury ended up staying with me until 6 weeks from race day. So my run training was just terrible almost all the way through, but I fortunately got healthy for the running, not a moment too soon. On the bike, I had chronic issues with a recurring right knee injury. Whenever I did any sort of serious mileage, it would come back. And sure enough, when I started ramping up my bike mileage, it came back. So I had to figure that out. Fortunately, I did. I got a professional fitting. I tried some different shoes. And I actually did some taping you put all those three things together, and I was able to get over the hump with that knee injury on the bike. And then with swimming, that's my weakness. I don't swim terribly well, but I suffered 2 injuries in my swim training, both of which reduced me to either kick-only workouts or one-arm swimming workouts. And they were both roughly 10-day to 2-week injuries. So I had a lot of sort of challenges and setbacks with the training. Overall, the bike training, once I got past the knee thing, really went quite well. Running is supposed to be my strength, but it just, like I said, it wasn't until 6 weeks before race day that I was finally able to train full on in the run.
Wow. So you did 2 marathons leading into Ironman Santa Rosa. What races were those, and how did that leave you feeling? Did that put you in a hole going into Ironman Santa Rosa, or did that help?
Yeah, it helped. So it's funny, I had my hometown marathon is the Modesto Marathon. I had run it 3 times, and I wanted to do it just, again, as a workout, just as a kind of a benchmark thing for in the lead up to Santa Rosa. And that fell 6 weeks, 6 weeks minus a day from race day. Before that event, I was only able to run 9-minute miles in training. I could run, but the groin kept me from running at my normal paces. But the marathon, I don't know if it was because I had a number on my belly, but I decided to just kind of push it a little bit more. And it was a weird thing. So I started off at roughly 9-minute mile pace because that's as fast as I've been able to go, without, sort of what I call red flag pain. But I gradually ran faster and faster throughout that over the course of that marathon. And I could sort of tell I was having a breakthrough. I couldn't explain it. It didn't make much sense on the surface. As a coach, I would have told any athlete who was doing what I was doing, "You're an idiot." You know, don't do that. But it's funny. I ended up running the last mile, I think in 6:50 or something, having started at 8:49. And it was sort of like this, it looked intentional, but it wasn't. I just gradually accelerated. And for some reason, this thing that should have been stupid and set me back ended up kind of being the thing that got me over the hump with the groin injury. And from then on, I was on a steady, not only was I getting healthier so that I was able to run faster and faster without pain, but my run fitness and performance increased at just an almost unbelievable rate. So just 2 weeks after the Modesto marathon, which again, I ran at a completely uneven pace, but my time was 3:30. 2 weeks after that, I ran the Boston Marathon as a workout, and I ran that in 2:54. And again, not pushing all the way because I knew my legs weren't ready for the hills in Boston. But that race also gave me a big bump. And then I think 2 weeks after that, I ran a half marathon, again, just as a workout, and ran about 118 flat and just felt effortless at 5:56, 5:57 per mile. So I almost couldn't believe, I didn't want to look at the whole thing too closely because it didn't really make any sense. And I was just gaining fitness so rapidly. So I still wasn't quite where I wanted to be going into Santa Rosa, but given where I was, just 6 weeks before the race, I was really grateful that somehow it had come together that way.
Okay. So did you have a certain training plan that you were using? Or I know you're a coach yourself. Did you put your own plan together? What was this like?
Yeah, I did not follow a plan. Some people listening may have seen my book, Run, the Mind-Body Method of Running by Feel, where I have a chapter called Winging It. And I don't truly wing it in my training, but I generally don't create structured plans for myself. I just have I have certain parameters, certain benchmarks, and it's all in my head. And I just know where I am and where I need to go. And if you look at, I do log my training online. And if you looked at my training log for the many months I was preparing for this race, it would look like I was following a plan. And in a sense I am. I just don't really write it down ahead of time. It's sort of, it's loosely formatted in my head, but I make specific decisions about what to do, on any given day, just days before I actually do it. I'll look ahead to the weekend and see what kind of big sessions that make the most sense. It's not an approach that an inexperienced athlete could pull off, but I'm very experienced, and I find that athletes often are too wedded to their plans, and really a plan is just a prediction of the future, and humans are terrible at predicting the future. So you don't know what the best workout to do is Wednesday, 5 weeks from now. You might have some idea, you might have some hope about it, but you don't really know until you get there, what your body's ready for, what you can benefit the most from. So I take sort of more of a jazz than a symphonic approach to my training, and just I know what the principles all are, but I also let the moment weigh heavily in deciding exactly the specifics of my daily training.
Okay. So with your training, were you doing a lot of brick workouts where you would bike and then run, or maybe even swim and then bike, anything like that?
I did not do any bricks involving swims. It was not inconvenient. It was not at all convenient for me too. And I didn't see a heck of a lot of need. I didn't, because my running was so, there were big chunks of time when I simply couldn't run. I would do like steep uphill treadmill walking as a substitute for running. But what I did, actually I only did one like kind of classic brick. The rest I did tons and tons of transition runs. So I would do, usually it would be some kind of interval ride or a long ride. And then just do a 10-minute run. And I got to the point where I would do a transition run after almost every single bike ride. So they weren't long, but it got to the point when doing some amount of running off the bike was just like, I don't know, dessert after dinner, or flossing your teeth after brushing, or just sort of automatic.
Right. So do you have an idea of how many hours your training maxed out at?
Yeah, I had 2 week, not counting the sort of corrective exercise I do every evening, like 15 to 20 minutes of stuff I've collected from physical therapists to deal with all my injuries over the years. I didn't log that. So if you just log the swim, bike, run, and gym-based strength training, I had 2 weeks that were just over 20 hours. There actually wasn't a ton of variation. So right out of the gate, I was at 14 hours a week. And then over the course of many months, that average just gradually crept up and up until, from 14 to 20 and change.
Right. Now, I've read many of your books. I'm a huge fan of yours. Were you using the 80-20 method with your own training?
Yeah, I mean, I did not like sit down with a calculator, but actually, if you went back and sat down with a calculator to see what the percentages were, it would be very close to 80-20 for both swimming and cycling. It would not have been for running, but only because I had a governor on my pace in the form of that groin injury. So, I would try to do what I could. I figured out sort of fairly late in the game that I could do very steep uphill running on a treadmill. And of course, your speed isn't all that high, but your heart rate is, because you're at 15%. So once I realized I could do that without aggravating the groin too much, I had a little bit of intensity in my running. But before that, it was more like, 100-0 rather than 80-20. But actually within those last few weeks, it was, even in the running, I was probably pretty close to 80-20.
Okay. So I know you're an author and you also train. What else do you have on your plate aside from training and writing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big reader, so I read a ton. And then, I don't have kids, but, my wife doesn't work. I work at home. So we have, a lot of time together. We're both big foodies. So our favorite thing to do together is just to go out, find places to eat. We like to travel. We're actually on an extended road trip together now. I live in California, but I'm coming at you from my parents' home in Rhode Island, where we actually just arrived. So yeah, food, travel, spending time with my wife, those are high priorities.
Nice. So if we kind of look at your training through another lens, with all this training of 20 plus hours a week, and you've been doing this for years and years, were there any days where you just mentally, didn't want to train?
Not well. In swimming, yes. It's funny. I tend to maintain a very, very high motivation to train consistently if I have a big goal in front of me, and the Ironman certainly was a big goal. And as I said, I signed up for it, I think maybe 10 months before race day, so that kept me motivated for a long time. I did struggle a bit in the swimming just because I was very frustrated with it. It's always been my weakness, swimming, but back around 2003, I had kind of a breakthrough where I got some help from a coach. I improved kind of overnight a lot. And I still wasn't great, but I got to the level where swimming was fun. I'm just so competitive that if I'm not doing something well, I just don't enjoy it that much. And I really thought that I could, given enough time, I could get back to the level I had been at in 2003, and it just didn't happen. And I did get disillusioned, and it did sap some of the motivation from my training. But with the cycling and the running, I just did not really struggle for motivation. It was I looked forward to it. There was I had to rally for some multi-hour rides when the weather was really cold and I knew my fingertips were going to be frozen. But overall, when I was out there, I was exactly where I wanted to be.
Okay. So to transition a little bit to talk about the race itself, when did you actually book your lodging for the race? Because I know you live in Northern California, and this is more of a middle California, so y'all wanted to stay kind of local to the race venue. Where did y'all stay at? And knowing this is a two transition race, where did you want to stay at? Because they're separated by 50 miles, I think.
Yeah, pretty close to that. Yeah, they're far apart. Yeah, I poked around a bit at the time I signed up, which again was around 10 months out, and I booked then this place called the Flamingo Conference Resort Center or something like that. Flamingo is in the name. And actually, my wife and I stayed at that same place on both reconnaissance trips. So when by the time the race came around, it was actually our third stay there, and it was just nice to it brings a certain comfort level when you know the layout, you know where the pool is, you know what the restaurant serves, all that. So the location wasn't super close to like the finish line, wasn't super close to where I needed to get onto the shuttle to get out to the race, but it was close enough. And it was a good hotel, and it was a good choice overall.
Okay. So going into this race, whenever you got to the packet pickup and the Ironman Village, was this an experience that you were familiar with, or did this give you some kind of anxiety? What was all this like?
Well, it had been by that point 17 years since my one prior Ironman, and so. That's a long time for memories to fade. And also, it's a long time for some of the specifics to change. So I felt a little bit like a rookie. But I took a no stone unturned approach to the whole process. So every aspect of the race, not in a control freak kind of way, but just I wanted to be maximally prepared. I was just kind of very focused, and I had read the athlete's guide backwards and forwards. So even though I did feel like I was sort of starting over again as an Ironman triathlete, I felt as prepared as I could be, and really very, very little anxiety at all. The only things I was anxious about were uncontrollable, such as maybe flatting on the bike, stuff like that. You read probably my blog write up about the race, right?
Yes.
Where I mentioned that I chose a motto of "Don't panic," and I really internalized that. So my mindset was focused and calm, with just a little bit of anxiety about some of the uncontrollables.
Okay, so bike check-in is all the way up at the lake, which is a long way away from athlete check-in, which is in Santa Rosa proper. Did y'all drive it up there, or did you pay to have your bike shipped up there? What was that like?
Yeah, I drove up there. So actually on the way in, so the race is Saturday. My wife and I came up Thursday, and actually our first stop was at the lake. I had swum in the lake 2 weeks before as part of my second reconnaissance trip. But I wanted to swim the buoy marked course before the race. So 2 days before, we made a quick stop there, and the buoys were up, which I was happy to see. I actually emailed the race director to find out exactly when they were going up. She couldn't commit to a specific time, but or the woman who responded, who was not actually the race director. But so yeah, I swam one loop of the 2-loop course at that time, and then came back the next afternoon. Did not swim again at that point, but yeah, I just checked in at that point. Yeah, it's a bit of a hike, but no big deal. I know it's like there wasn't, of the various things I had to take care of. I had plenty of time for all of them, so it is a very pleasant drive. It's a beautiful part of the country, so and the weather was good, so it was no big deal to have to make that second trip there to drop off the bike.
All right. Now, whenever you scoped it out the first time and did your first reconnaissance of the venue, you probably realized that this was a long climb out of the swim up to transition area. What was your first thoughts about this?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't. My one thought there was that, I better select the right gear to preset my bike in the right gear for that hill. but there's one that one is it's over with fairly quickly. It's one where you would my thought was I'm going to stand on the pedals and just punch it, and then when you turn onto the main road there's actually a more sustained climb that you would want to be a little more patient for. But then when I got to Chalk Hill Road and saw that climb, I sort of forgot about every other climb and figured, okay, this one is huge and I'm going to do it twice. And so my focus really in terms of the elevation change aspect of the bike course was definitely centered on Chalk Hill Road.
Okay. I was more referring to this question about what did you think about the climb coming out of the swim going to transition?
Oh, I'm sorry. I completely I blew that one, didn't I? Yeah. So on foot. No, that one made me happy because I'm a runner, and I'm also a very light athlete, and so when I saw that, I saw a huge advantage for me partly because I'm a poor swimmer. So I sort of mentally decided that the swim didn't really end until you finished that run climb out of transition to T1. And if you put those two together, it would make my swim less of a disadvantage, if that makes any sense, because I knew I could run that hill faster than probably just about anyone in the entire race, even though I would be maybe 150th out of the water. So I was very happy that hill was there, which might sound masochistic, but because it is a tough way to get out of the water. But I thought I saw it as an element that was to my advantage.
Right. So the day before the race, from a nutrition standpoint, are you wanting to get any certain breakfast, lunch, and dinner in, or are you more focused on just keeping things normal?
I do a 1-day carbohydrate load, the research shows you can pick any of the last 3 days before the race to do it. I always do it as the last day, just because I tend to be a little more focused on portion control. I don't like gaining weight in the last week before a race, and that's easy to do when you're tapering. So I eat normally, but with a little more portion control until the last day before the race, and then on that day I just eat nothing but carbohydrate all day long. It's oatmeal for breakfast, banana snacks, some kind of noodles for lunch, a rice-centered dinner, that type of thing.
Okay. Now, walk me through what you're putting in your bike to run bag and also your swim to bike bags.
Yeah. So swim to bike is I had a aero helmet with a visor, so I didn't need separate sunglasses. My shoes, socks, which I had heavily lubricated on the inside. And I made a bad decision to put arm sleeves in there. I thought it was a very good decision because in my second reconnaissance ride on the course, I nearly became hypothermic. And I was really worried about having that happen again. So I knew it would take time to put on the arm sleeves in transition, but I thought, you know what, I'll be glad I did, So I had some arm sleeves in there too. Am I missing anything? Socks, shoes, helmet, arm sleeves. I think that was it. And then for bike to run, it was just shoes, number belt, and sunglasses.
So very simple, nothing overcomplicated, and very straightforward.
That's my style.
Right. Your nutrition plan, I've been doing this podcast. This is going to be episode 250, 60 plus, Wow. And I've been hearing more and more about your nutrition that you use, which is the Morten. I think that's how you say it.
Marten, yeah.
Marten. They have two different types of liquid to use on the bike, and you combine those two. Walk me through this.
Yeah, so I was turned on to Marten 2 summers ago. I trained with a professional running team based in Flagstaff, and Marten was very new then. It had gotten some attention because it was used in that Nike-sponsored sub-2-hour marathon attempt. And the team, it wasn't available in commercially in the States yet, but the team was experimenting with it. And as part of that whole thing I was doing in Flagstaff, I was able to run the Chicago Marathon as a pro, which strings had to be pulled. I mean, normally you have to be a sub 213 marathoner as a male to do that. But I ran as a pro, which means I could have my own bottles on the course at the elite aid stations. And so I chose Martin for my bottles on the race course, and it worked out very well for me. So when I turned my attention to Ironman Santa Rosa, I wanted to stick with something that was just proven to work for me. In the Chicago Marathon, I actually would do the lighter concentration at one aid station and then the heavier concentration in the next, just because in training I had found that I tried going with all this the heavier, but it was just a little too much. So yeah, on the bike, I actually, instead of having to alternate, I could just mix the two together in my front end aero bottle, and did it that way.
Wow. So ideally you were going to get about 80 to 90 grams of carbs per hour. How did you get to this number?
It's, the research shows that basically the more carbohydrate you can absorb, the more of a performance benefit you get. There's no ceiling to that. The ceiling is just what you can actually physically absorb, / tolerate. 30 grams are better than 15, 45 are better than 30, 60 are better than 45, and on it goes. And, when you get up to around 80, 90, that's when a lot of athletes just simply, they started to get GI issues. So I had found in my training that I could tolerate about 90 per hour before I would have GI issues. So that's how it was just based on a combination of the science and then my, guinea pigging with myself.
Okay. The day before the race, to kind of transition a little bit more to before the race here, did you sleep well the night before the race?
I did. I usually take some kind of sleep aid the night before a race. It's not something I tell athletes that they should also do because, every athlete, has their own views about like what they should and shouldn't put in their body. But, for me, it just, I like to just, it works for me, and I can just check the box and know I'm going to get a good night's sleep before the race. So I slept I got 8 hours, believe it or not. Even with a 3:45 a.m. wake up, I got 8 hours of sleep the night before the race.
Wow. So you get up on race morning. What's your race day morning ritual like before you leave where you're staying?
It was pretty hasty just because, I wanted to wake up as late as I could without missing the shuttles, or, I wanted to get on one of the earlier shuttles to have plenty of time in transition. So I got up at 8 right away. One thing I do that is a little bit outside the norm is that for longer races, something like an Ironman, I do actually a high fat breakfast, not a high carb breakfast. And that's based on research showing that if you have tapered and carbo loaded, when you wake up on the morning of a race, your body's carbohydrate stores are still very close to maximum. So you don't actually have to consume a lot of carbohydrate on race morning to sort of top off those stores. So by having a low carb, high fat breakfast, you can top off your glycogen stores, but you can also, if you have a high fat meal before exercise, your muscles will burn fat more preferentially. So it makes a lot of sense because you go into the race not at all carbohydrate deprived, but you've sort of flipped that metabolic switch with that high fat breakfast to get your muscles relying a little bit more on fat than they otherwise would within the race itself. So in order to do it, this is something you want to practice with. You want it to get about 1,000 calories, which is a pretty hefty meal. So that's why I woke up and just wolfed down those 1,000 calories as quickly as I could because I wanted to allow myself enough time to digest them. And then, I had pretty much everything packed and ready to go. So I just got dressed, checked my checklist, made sure I had everything, used the bathroom, and my wife drove me to the shuttles at the downtown area where the athletes gathered.
Okay. So the breakfast that you had for 1,000 calories, what's that consist of?
It was just a couple of breakfast sandwiches and then a couple spoonfuls of MCT oil. That was it.
Okay. I've heard of some pros actually having like an avocado sandwich before their race. And that almost makes a lot of sense now of why they want that fat in there versus like a lot of oatmeal or a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or something like that. Like that actually makes a lot more sense of why they'd want to have that avocado there now.
Yeah. It all comes from. I've sort of waited for more research to come along and for elite athletes the approach more, because it's not the usual fat is good, carbs are bad thing. It's like my normal diet is very high in carbohydrate. I just do it for that one meal. I mean, I do some carbohydrate depleted training sessions, but it's just a very targeted, specific thing that you're doing. But it really is, it's sort of based on one Japanese study I found that was the rationale was solid. The results were intriguing. I tested it on myself. It works for me and it's what I do.
Okay. So you get on the bus. Did your wife ride with you over to the swim start?
No. So I was on my own. I had a little bit of a support crew. And I should say, my wife, God bless her, she's we've been together for, 21 years, and she's been to a lot of races, and it's kind of been there, done that. So she had no plans to spectate at all. We had our dog with us, and she just she dropped me off, went back to the hotel, and just hung out, for the day, with our pooch. But I had one of my two siblings there, my younger brother, and then a couple of friends. And, but I told them all, my friends had a young baby, which makes, as you can imagine, spectating in an Ironman a little more difficult. And then my brother was sort of on a business trip and was really sort of going out of his way to be there to support me. So I told all of them, don't even bother with the swim. It's far away. It's an incredible hassle to get there. So I told them, I'm on my own for the swim. I'll see you out there on the bike course. So, and I was fine with that. I was just in my own little bubble at that point.
All right. And this is the brother that you coached through his first marathon?
Yeah, I mean, I have two brothers. They both run, and I coach them both. This brother, Sean, my younger brother, has done, I think, 11 marathons now.
Wow, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So you get over to the swim start, and it's a long way over there, so it takes probably about an hour to get over there, I would assume. You get over there, what are you doing in transition to set up all of your stuff for T1?
Yeah, just, making sure my tires hadn't popped overnight or in the heat of the previous day. Since I dropped them off, they were as they should be. I just gave the bike a check over. I put some stickers on the disc wheel to cover the tube area. Once it's fully inflated, there's like a little divot in there, where you can access the nozzle to inflate, but it's not aerodynamic. So the Zip supplies stickers that you can use to cover that. So little odds and ends like that, just checking that my, swim to bike gear bag had everything, in it, applying sunscreen. I had ordered tri-tats, so I could skip body marking. I had, my pre-race research had taught me that you wanted to avoid the porta potties that were in the transition area and go down to the swim start. So I got down there early where there were no lines. That was a good move. It really pays to do your research on these little things that become big things. I'm probably forgetting some things, like a little bit, not much in the way of warm up. I did not get in the water. I just did some mobilization exercises. There were a couple athletes there who recognized me and just wanted to chat a bit, and I was fine with that. It was kind of cool to be recognized and to have athletes you don't even know, wish you well, and to hear about what they had read of mine and whether it had helped them at all. So that was a fun little element to the morning that also it just helps keep you calm too when you're just, meeting a stranger and having a pleasant conversation.
Right. To back up a little bit, I saw your video on social media. It could have been Instagram or Facebook one, but you're finishing up a run on a road and you finished with saying, "Do I look ready?" Did you feel ready?
Yeah, I did. I felt very ready. I had, weight isn't the most important thing, but I've been tracking my weight and I got down to the same weight I had raced the Chicago Marathon at 2 years before. And when you get there the right way, it's just another indicator that that marathon went extremely well. And so I knew that I was at about that level of fitness again. And yeah, I was super confident in my bike. The run, if you told me that I would be at that level 10 months before, I would have been disappointed. But given the full context, I was very excited that I had made as much progress with the running. And the swimming, I had sort of just accepted the fact that I didn't improve as much as I had hoped to, but I had a really awesome wetsuit. I went kind of top notch equipment wise on everything. So I got myself a Roka Maverick X wetsuit that really just made me feel like a much better swimmer in open water. So yeah, I was really excited to race. It's part of the difference maybe of just, I turned 48, just a few days before the race. And, I'm experienced. I've been doing this forever. And I just had I had a process focus. Like I had goals, I wanted to beat my previous Ironman time. I wanted to be well under 10 hours. I wanted to try and qualify for the Ironman World Championship. So those are all outcome goals, but I really wanted to not miss the race. I actually wanted to be out there doing the race and not just wishing it to be over, not just, hurrying to get to the finish line. So before the race, I couldn't wait to get going. And then I wanted to actually just really enjoy the process of those 10 hours of being out there doing something I invested just a lot in preparing for.
Right. So, with the swim start, the pro being, wait, this isn't a pro race, so there is no pros here, I don't think. The
Correct.
cannon goes off. Where do you seed yourself and how long between the time the cannon goes off and you getting in the water?
They had a sign for swimmers expecting to swim between an hour and 70 minutes. My hope was to be to swim like 104 and change. So I slid into that area. I didn't want to just put myself up with the sub 60 minute. I mean, that was my initial goal, was to swim under an hour, but I knew I wouldn't. And I didn't want people swimming over the top of me or to be getting in the way of athletes who deserved to be ahead of me. But I also didn't want to be behind anyone that I was going to have to swim over the top of either. So I really tried to seed myself realistically. And I think it was maybe 2 minutes passed from the time the cannon went off to the time I got in the water.
Okay. So the first loop of the swim, I think it was like 31 and some change, if I remember right. And
that's right.
The second loop was a little bit fast, or a little bit slower, rather. It was a positive split, and that was due to some calves cramping. How was this for you mentally? Because I know you have this mantra of don't panic.
Yeah.
But at some point, you had to have panicked a little bit because your calves are cramping, which could have thrown your whole race out the window.
Yeah, in fact, in my first Ironman, I am prone to calf cramps when I swim. I think it's because I just don't swim with enough ankle action. I don't swim with loose ankles because I'm not a cramper in general. I only cramp when I'm just in that dorsiflexed, swimming position, kicking position. So I knew it could happen. And in fact, in my first Ironman, I suffered a vicious cramp in my right calf. It was only literally like a minute and a half into that race. And that one stopped me dead in the water. And it was such a bad cramp that it actually injured the calf. And it got worse and worse and worse on the bike. And on the run, it got so bad that my entire right leg went numb. And I couldn't even feel my right foot hit the ground. This is at Ironman Wisconsin in 2002. So actually, although I did cramp this time in both calves, the cramps weren't as bad. It just forced me to swim with my foot at 90-degree angle to my shin, which is like dragging an anchor. It's definitely not ideal, but by doing that, I was able to just manage the cramp. So I was comparing that to the disaster that had happened 17 years before and thinking, well, it could be worse. And so I just, I didn't panic. I just wasn't going to panic no matter what happened. I really wasn't, because, I had just repeated that mantra so many times that I was almost self-brainwashed. I was happy about that first loop. I thought, well, if I do that again, I'll be about a minute faster than I thought I was going to swim. And I thought, there's a minute in the bank. And to come out and see that I had swum the second loop 4 minutes slower, again, didn't make me panic. It was just a little chagrining.
Right. So with the swim, I know that this is a 2-loop swim course. You go out, then you make a right, then you go down there. It's like a rectangle, then you come back and do it all over again. How was the water for you? Was there choppy? Did you get hit or kicked? What's this like?
Yeah, anyone who's done one of these things knows what it's like unless you're off the front. There was, because when I was finishing my first loop, the last of the athletes to enter the water had probably gotten in maybe just 2 or 3 minutes before. So that, it's funny, when I saw how much slower my second loop was compared to my second, I went to look at I sort of randomly went through some of the other athletes' results who swam similar times or a little faster, and found that almost everyone else had even split it. So I felt like I couldn't really blame the slower second loop on, the traffic I had to swim through, and there was quite a lot of it. And I knew I hadn't bonked or hit the wall. I paced myself fine. I didn't feel tired at the end of it. So the only thing I could finger was the calf cramping. But yeah, I don't feel like I swam extra distance. My Garmin says I swam 4,500 yards, which is extra distance, but I wouldn't really trust that. So, I was really able to maintain my focus on, I just told myself, just focus on the things that are enjoyable about this. I like the water. I like swimming in lakes. I like swimming in fresh water. I felt good swimming. I really liked my wetsuit. So I just kept my mind on, I was maybe aware of a dozen things that were going on at any given time. And maybe half of them were positive and half were negative. And I just actively chose to focus on the elements of the experience that I was enjoying and that were positive. And really, I truly did enjoy the swim overall. Even when, I was getting kicked or bumping into people, I just treated it as something that was unavoidable, that was just simply part of the experience. And I really didn't let it bother me.
Nice. So you get done with the swim, you head up to the tent to change over, get your bag. What was T1 like? I know it's just a little over 7 minutes. It's like 7 minutes, 2 seconds. What was going on there?
Yeah, that was annoying. I had hoped to do the transition in 4.5 minutes because, again, I felt like it's mostly running. And I felt like I could just crush that hill, get into transition faster than just about anyone. And then, I didn't have sunglasses to worry about. I had the visor that was part of the helmet. I just felt like, I can really, gain some time here. But yeah, the first thing that happened was that the visor fell off the helmet when I pulled it out of the bag. So I had to put it back on, but I was being very deliberate because I know that rushing in a transition actually slows you down. So I was just telling myself, just be methodical, do things right so you don't have to do them twice. So I took my time with the visor. Then I start to pull on the arm sleeves, and gosh, that's the other thing I had in my bag was a towel because I knew that putting, trying to pull arm sleeves over wet arms would be a disaster. So I took time to towel my arms off. Then I'd start pulling on the sleeves, and Terry, I could not get the things on. I just couldn't. And that's as close as I came to panicking during the race. I briefly flirted with the idea of saying, screw it, just not going with them. But I really did suffer terribly in that second reconnaissance ride. I almost had to abandon that ride. I was so cold, and I just thought, I can't let that happen. So I did as it was going to take to get those arm sleeves on, and they still weren't perfect. They weren't like all smooth on my arms. They're, you want to be as aero as possible. I did not put them on in the most aerodynamic fashion, but I got them on eventually. And then once I got them on the bike, it just felt like a relief, because then I felt like, I knew I was so fit for the ride that I could get back from, a point of the race where I had definitely probably performed worse than the other guys in my age group who were also trying to get to Kona. And then I was on the bike and doing something where I thought maybe I could, that things would swing back in my favor.
Yeah. Well, I just did Chattanooga 70.3, and I had almost a 7-minute transition for a 70.3. Uh-huh. And there's no changing tent there. So I was like, my wife, she texted me and said, "Were you packing a lunch and taking a nap in there and putting your makeup on? What were you doing in there?" And I was like, I could not get my dang sock on the right way, because I'm only going to mess with it once all day. So I want to make sure it's right, And it took me a while to put my sock on. I could not get it on right. So I understand the whole T1 time being a little slower than you want. And man. So coming out of transition, you go around this little block here and you take a right going across the bridge that you just swam under, which is a massive, tall bridge over the water there. And then it's a nice downhill for a little bit. And they actually tell people to slow down going out of transition here because there could be wrecks on this hill. How are you dealing with this nice downhill here?
Yeah, again, I had ridden it twice in training, and I'm not the biggest daredevil on the bike, but I'm not a scaredy cat either. So I wanted to ride it as fast as I could. You can't use the aero bar; you're not allowed to, and you wouldn't want to. It's not a really dangerous descent, but I let it all hang out to the best of my ability. In both of my reconnaissance rides, it was actually foggy and the pavement was a little wet. So I couldn't actually practice, going 100%. So, it was a little bit, despite the previous rides, it was a little bit of a new experience in that regard. But yeah, I rode that part of the course pretty well, I think.
Nice. So, when did you actually realize that the arm sleeves that you had struggled putting on in transition, you didn't want to wear it after all?
Yeah, geez, it's weird because if you look at the numbers, the weather conditions were pretty similar to that ride when I became borderline hypothermic, but I wasn't more than an hour into the ride when, because it's warming up steadily. It was in the low 50s at the start, and then it was going to end up, I think, in the 70s. So, the temperature's climbing. That's exactly what it didn't do on the day of my second reconnaissance ride. And yeah, the day was warming up, and much, much earlier than I had hoped. I got to a point where they were just a distraction. Like I was uncomfortably warm, and my attention kept going to that fact, rather than just being focused on, turning over the pedals. So way earlier than I would have hoped. I wanted those damn things off.
Wow. So at some point you realized that your gels that you had for the ride were gone?
Yeah. So this is, definitely I was sort of a rookie again in certain ways as an Ironman racer. And yeah, I had stuffed some gels in the pocket areas of my tri-suit, in the low back area. It's the last thing in the world that I thought they would come out, because they just go in there very snugly. So I didn't do a bike special needs bag. So my plan was to, drink the Martin I had in my aero bottle and in the seat tube bottle, which I knew would last me about 3 hours. And then my plan was to switch to water, to pick up water at aid stations and get the calories I needed from the Marten gels that I had. So it was a fine plan, and in fact, I did not realize that the gels weren't there until I got to that point in the race when I had switched over to water because the Marten drink was gone. And I just reached back to grab the first gel right on schedule. And I realized that not only was that gel gone, but all four of the ones I had stashed back there were gone.
Wow. So going back to don't panic here, what was plan B?
Well, I had taken 2 power bars and cut them into slices and stuffed them in the sort of nutrition area. And there's a little nutrition cache on the top tube of the bike. So I immediately started gobbling those as fast as my stomach could tolerate them because I did not want to get behind on calories. So I had planned to eat some of those anyway, but they were more of like a supplement. Basically, if I got hungry on the bike, I tend to try to stay liquid, semi-solid, even in an Ironman, start to finish. But you can get hungry enough that it just becomes an annoyance. So I don't think you need solids in order to get enough calories in an Ironman, but solids can just sort of help you keep hunger at bay. So I had those there for that purpose. But then, plan B, once I didn't have the gels, was just to actually rely on them for the calories I needed. So that's what I did. It wasn't quite enough. I mean, it wasn't as much as I would like to have had. But it was the best I could do in the circumstances.
Right.
And I didn't, by the way, I didn't want to drink the Gatorade because it upsets my stomach. So I could have grabbed Gatorade from the aid stations for more, as another alternative, but I thought I thought there was a good chance it would make me sick to my stomach. So I just went with water and the power bars from that point on.
Okay. So the course itself, it's basically 2 loops with a different lollipop stick on each end, if you want to call it like that. That's about the best way to describe it, I think. How are these loops going for you? Did you feel like you were hitting your power numbers or heart rate numbers or RP numbers? What was this like?
Yeah, it's funny. I focused mostly just on, I was looking at my speed and I was looking at my cadence a little bit. It's funny. I focus on power indoors, but outdoors, maybe it's the runner in me. I just, whenever I have a chance to speed, that's all I care about. But even more than that, I was going by feel. Cause I know it's all too easy. You feel great in those early miles. It's all too easy to get sucked in. And I was also just focused on the other riders because I had swum poorly. I think I was like 175th out of the water. So there was a lot of traffic. And a lot of my attention was just, I had gotten a drafting penalty in my first Ironman just because in that one I swam even worse. And it was just like a caravan of riders. And, I don't know. It's just, sometimes in those circumstances, it's hard to figure out how to stick to the letter of the rules. And I had that experience of getting a penalty in the first Ironman. So I was trying to be hyper vigilant to keep 6 bike lengths separation, because there were just a lot of riders around me. So I felt fine physically. My goal was to ride 5 hours and 10 minutes on the bike. I felt like it was actually all I had to do to achieve that was just not fall off the bike. I felt strong. I knew just based on my training that I could do it. And so I wasn't really worried about am I going fast enough? Am I working too hard or not hard enough? A big chunk of my attention was focused on those other riders and just trying to keep my distance and paying a little bit of attention. I know for whatever reason, a cluster of the top guys in my age group I was seeing them, because people got their name, their number, their ages on their calf. And for whatever reason, it seemed like every third person around me was between 45 and 49 years old. So I was sort of focused on that as well.
Okay. Tell me about the multitasking you did.
Oh, yeah. So, I ended up getting a drafting penalty. I got was maybe around 50 miles into the race, and I was climbing a hill. And by that point, things had settled out a little bit, but there was still, there was a fair number of other riders around. And I got, the thing that kept happening is that, people would make an effort to pass me, and then that effort would cost them, and then they would slow down. So as soon as they get in front of you, they're going slower than you. And the rules require, it's not on them. Once they're in front of you, they can do whatever they want. It's on you as the rider who's been passed to allow 6 bike lengths to open up, which is really annoying. When the person in front of you is going slower, you would think, oh, there's a simple solution, just pass them back. But you also aren't allowed to do that either. Otherwise, two riders could get in cahoots and just leapfrog each other through the course. So I understand, I understand the rules, but I had another one of these episodes occur when I was climbing a hill, made an effort to pass me, kind of bogged down in front of me. And at that point, there were a couple riders right behind me too. And I'm climbing a hill, and I thought, the only way I can get 6 bike lengths to open is to literally stop pedaling. If you stop pedaling on a hill, you fall off your bike, you're clipped in. And also I knew that I would, if I just tried to soft pedal and slow down a lot, I would get passed by the guy right behind me. And then I would have to slow down more to get 6 bike lengths behind him. And I think there was another rider there too, so I would have just been going backwards in order to avoid a drafting penalty. So I'm not, it sounds like I'm making a few excuses. I know the rules and I accept responsibility. I'm just sort of describing it as I experienced it. I was trying to be vigilant on the drafting thing. But there was just a moment of lapse there where I thought, you know what, I'm just going to stay where I am until we get to the top of this hill. And it wasn't very long. And then over the hill, the guy who had passed me, got some more steam. He was a bigger rider and was much better going on the flats and the downhills than the climbs. So the 6 bike lengths opened up, and then I could relax a little bit and just focus on myself. And it was soon after that. Apparently, a course marshal had witnessed this whole episode and, pulled alongside me and pulled the card out and read me my rights. And I remember just dropping my head, but I sort of just, don't panic.
Yeah.
So at that point,
did he tell you that you had a 4-minute or a 5-minute penalty here and that you had to report to the next thing? What was this like?
That's right. Yeah, that's right. I had to. And I knew where the penalty tents were. And I was only 9 or 10 miles beyond the first penalty tent. And I knew the second one was at 91 or 92 miles. So I had to ride about 40 miles knowing, with this knowledge. During that time, I had to pee really bad. And normally I've peed on the bike before, but, for some reason I just couldn't do it this time. Long story short, when I got to the penalty tent, I really had to go badly. And I was naive because when I did my first Ironman, they did stand down penalties. So when you got popped for drafting, you had to stop immediately and just hang out there with the referee. This was different. So I was naive about penalty tents. I thought that maybe they would have bathrooms there, but they didn't. So I was kind of in a desperate situation. I felt desperate when I got there. So I thought, I can at least make use of the 5 minutes by peeing myself as soon as I'm not moving. So that's what I did. I peed on myself and which is against the rules, which I also didn't know. Ignorance is not either. A little bit of a puddle formed underneath my feet. And there was I think one of the referees had her young son, the aid station, and he was so innocent and naive. He saw the puddle. He said, somebody spilled something. The child, I think, did not know. He wasn't speaking in code. He did not know that it was urine. Not much of it, most of it just stayed in my shorts, but there was a little bit of evidence between me. And then the referee noticed it, and she asked me, did you, you asked about the line. I said, the kid noticed the puddle. He said, did somebody spill something? And I said, it's called multitasking, kid. Yeah, That's the line you're referring to from my blog,
Yeah.
right?
So did you get another penalty for doing that yourself, or did they warn you?
Apparently it's a disqualification if you do that. So not only did I not know that you weren't allowed to pee on yourself, I mean, presumably you're allowed to pee on yourself while you're on your bike pedaling, but I guess you can't when you're just standing still in the penalty area. I mean, it makes sense, because if everyone did that, it would kind of be pretty ripe in there by the end of the day. Although there was someone else who came in right after me into the penalty area to serve a penalty, and I noticed a puddle forming under his feet too. So I'm pretty sure everyone does it, even though it's against the rules. But it is a disqualification, and I learned this only later. I won't go into how I learned about it, but when the boy said what he said, and I said what I said, the referee hadn't noticed, the one who was actually, had me on the clock. But then she asked me outright, her phrase was, did you use the bathroom? And I was tempted to say snarkily, no, because there was no bathroom present. I had relieved myself. I hadn't used the bathroom. I wish I had a bathroom to use. But, I told her yes. And she said, don't do it again. And so I had an inkling then that it was rules, but even then I had no idea that she could have disqualified me. And quite honestly, I didn't put this in the blog, but I think the only reason she didn't disqualify me is that I had actually, I think a lot of athletes, when they get into the penalty tent, they're angry and that they're not exactly very nice to the referees there. But because part of my don't panic, enjoy the process mindset, when I came to the penalty tent, I sort of had an empathetic attitude toward the referee. My thought was like, this is a hard job. Like, people are mad at you. She probably takes a lot of guff from athletes all day long. It's sort of like being a meter maid. You know what I mean? Like, it's not a pleasant interaction. So I actually made an effort to kind of just joke around with her. At one point I said, man, this is the longest 5 minutes of my life. And, she laughed a little bit at that. So I think that she appreciated that I treated her like a human being and sort of saw the whole situation from her perspective. And I just didn't want to be another one of those athletes who gave her a hard time and made the day long for her. And I really honestly think if I hadn't done that, she probably would have pulled me from the race. So, it's just, the reason I'm saying this is not really to pat myself on the back, but to make the point that when you have that stay relaxed, don't panic attitude, it not only makes the race more pleasant for yourself, but it can also be difference making in terms of the outcome of the race. And that's just kind of a dramatic example of that. Like, it could have made the difference between, being allowed to finish and not being allowed to finish. Just the fact that I was not going to panic and lose control of my emotions.
Right. So after you get done with your penalty, you get back on the bike course. How does the rest of the bike course go? I know that this course has roughly almost 4,000 feet of gain on it. How is this going for you?
Yeah, the second loop, I felt that I was losing a lot of power, and I did become concerned about it. I was sort of, because you're doing everything for the second time. So I sort of had, a memory of how fast I was going, during a certain stretch on the first loop and how fast I was going in the second loop and power and all that. And I knew that I was losing steam. I hit 56 miles in, I think 2:31:30. Like, I was right on pace for a 5:03 bike split. So I pretty much killed the first loop. I thought, well, there's no need to ride a 5:03. So I expected to slow down a little bit, but when I got well into that second loop, like when I rode Chalk Hill for the second time, I was in my lowest gear. I was standing on the pedals and I was barely moving. And, but at that point, it's funny, like, I felt like what I told myself at that moment was, I am somewhat fatigued, and the effect that the fatigue is having on me is that I've lost sort of my top gear. But I told myself that doesn't mean you're hitting the wall. That doesn't mean you're actually not not going to be able to run a strong marathon, I just sort of, I tried to, not lie to myself, but to put the most positive spin on the data I was seeing. So I knew that my performance was declining, but I just very consciously tried to minimize it and say, it doesn't mean anything more than that. You've lost some power, but you're not hitting a wall. So, my attitude from that point was just to, grind out the rest of it. And just try to, minimize the time losses and just get on to the run.
Okay. As far as the bike goes, what is a piece of advice that you would tell someone to be aware of that's going to do this race in the future?
It would be all about the drafting thing, to be honest. I think it's a huge deal. Maybe I'm just not that good at managing it, but I really think there are points in a race where it's really, really hard to maximize performance and also minimize risk of breaking the rules at the same time. So when I prepare for my next Ironman, I'm actually going to train somewhat differently to avoid another drafting penalty. And I'm going to practice, more of like a surging style of riding. So on my long rides, instead of trying to just be very consistent with my effort, I'm going to put in, sort of what runners would call like fartlek surges,
right?
Where I fluctuate around an average power, because I really think you need to be able to ride that way. Again, unless you're a top swimmer, if you're going to be realistically in a situation where there are going to be other riders of very similar ability around you, at least for the first 60, 70 miles of the ride, then you need to be able to just sort of surge to get away from people without cooking yourself. And the only way you can do that is if you've done it in training. But there are also moments when you have to be sort of, in order to get the best of both worlds, you need to be content to ride a little bit slower than you actually could, precisely because you're in one of those situations where someone has made an effort to pass you and then bogs down to recover. In the future, when I do my next Ironman, I'll just sort of know that that's going to happen, and just be more comfortable allowing myself to slow down and ride slower than I know I could, you know what I mean? And just wait for those 6 bike lengths to open up, and then just go ahead and surge and power past that rider, and just power past enough so that I know that rider won't turn around and do the same thing back to me. So that's really advice for myself, just to be prepared for a slightly different style of riding, because it's not really a time trial, because there are so many other athletes out there. So the rules try to pretend like it's a time trial, but it's not. So that's my advice for me, but to me, it makes sense for other athletes to take the same approach. And again, maybe I just suck at this, and other athletes are like, "What's the big deal? It's no problem to ride hard and avoid drafting." I don't know, but I'm 2 for 2. I've done 2 Ironmans and gotten popped for drafting twice. And I do intend to do an Ironman, and I don't intend to get another drafting penalty.
Wow. So your nutrition plan, you had to make a plan B decision there. You got a penalty. Whenever you started getting towards the later portion of the bike ride, say miles 80, 90, and even breaking 100, when you're starting to get almost done with the bike ride, mentally, where's your headspace at? This is where a lot of people and a lot of athletes have dark spots on the bike ride, where they're mentally in this funk of, you have so much under you, but yet you still have so far to go. Did you experience anything like this?
I did not, actually. It worked out just the way I thought. Like, once I got over Chalk Hill for the second time, and so we're talking, I'm over 80 miles in, 80 something miles. And that's pretty much it for climbing on that course. So the last 25 miles of the course, are relatively flat, and some wind had come up, and because you are riding in one direction at that point, it was a headwind. But I realized that what I'd been telling myself was true, that even though I couldn't put out quite the power I could before, I was not really fatigued, or I was nowhere near exhaustion. So at that point, and also my saddle area, where, my body was in contact with the seat. I remember thinking at some point, wow, like I am not, usually if you're in the saddle for 4 hours, you're just really uncomfortable in that area. And I realized at one point, like, no, I feel fine down there. And I just added it to the list of things about the experience that I could be grateful about. And because I really wanted to just keep my focus on the good and keep it off the bad. So those last, I came out of the drafting, the penalty tent at 91 miles. So at that point, I've been standing still for 5 minutes. So I really wanted to make hay and make the best of those last 20 miles. And I really felt fine. I wasn't in that state where I'm like, oh, just God, let me get off this bike as soon as possible. I really just wanted to ride those last 20 miles well, get some time back, and it was just more process focused, get the job done. I was working hard, but I wasn't miserable. I wasn't in any kind of funk or dark place whatsoever.
That's awesome. So, the last, say, 2, maybe 3 miles of the bike ride, you got about 10, maybe 15 minutes left tops. Are you doing anything to start preparing to start running? Because this is whenever you're probably about to go, okay, now the tide is about to shift and I'm going to get back to where my roots are. It's the run. I'm ready to run now.
Yeah, the things I was thinking about there, I was mostly actually just thinking about getting ready for my flying dismount, because I in triathlons, I take my, feet out of the shoes, and leave the shoes on the pedals and, do a flying dismount. So I just wanted to, just be conscious of where I was on the course, how far I had to go. And just sort of, I was mentally rehearsing that, even honestly 15 minutes before I hit transition, I was mostly thinking about that.
Wow. I was at this race last year volunteering at the T2, and that's a long way from the dismount line to the changing tent. At least it was last year. Did they have it set up where the tent was at the far end again?
Yeah, it was a pretty long run.
Okay. And you were doing this in your socks?
Yes.
Okay. Did you change socks? How does T2 go?
No, the whole reason I greased up the inside of the socks was to make changing them not necessary. And I had intentionally picked socks that I knew worked well in both my bike shoes and my run shoes. T2 went much better than T1. There was another little kid there, and by that point, I've moved up. Despite the mishaps on the bike, I'd moved up. So I'm toward the front of the race at that point. I'm probably around 100th place. I don't know, maybe 90th. So I was the only one who got off the bike at that time. So it was at the point where they could find your bag for you, except they had a little kid find my bag for me, and he found the wrong bags. He heard the wrong number, and he was about to hand me the bag for another runner when I guess it might have been his mom. I like that they have kids involved. They're not always qualified for these jobs. And so, that was another moment when I was tempted to panic. And I did sort of, because I'm trying to, I don't want to be wasting time in T2 because I'm being given the wrong bag. So I did yell out, my number, the correct number, a couple of times to the kid. I hope I didn't scare him, because he's just a little kid. But I wasn't so much angry at him as just trying to minimize the time that I realized I was losing because the kid had to go back, find the right bag, and so that was a little bit excruciating. But my transition actually was very fast despite that, because I had no tie laces installed in my shoes, so I didn't have to tie my shoes, which doesn't seem like a big deal, but it can take forever when you're all just flummoxed and your fingers are trembling, and yeah, all I had was my shoes, my number belt, and sunglasses, so I was out of there in a jiffy.
Nice. I mean, it's like 3 minutes and 10 seconds, and you were out on the run course. this run course has under 300 feet of gain, and I don't think they changed the run course from last year. So there's a mix of asphalt, concrete, dirt, rocks, and just a mix of different surfaces here. How are you going to mentally attack this run course from a strategic standpoint?
Yeah, I just, it's really just first, you just want to see what kind of legs you have. And when I first got off the bike, when I dismounted in my socks, I felt like I had like a metal rod in my back. Like I felt like I looked ridiculous. I remember my brother was there yelling out, and I thought, oh my God, this is so embarrassing. Like I'm running like an ape or something. I've just felt like all wrong. But, by the time I actually had my running shoes on and, came out the transition exit, I knew instantly that I had good legs. And in my first Ironman, I remember my first thought when I started running was, my legs feel exactly like they did at the finish of the last marathon I did. It's like, and I'm just starting a marathon. It was like, that was like my darkest moment in that marathon. Like, how am I going to run 26.2 miles on these legs? But this one could not have been more different. I felt light and fresh. I felt like a 141 pound guy. And so I was excited. Like, I thought at that point, even like in just the first 100 meters of the marathon, I thought there's absolutely no way I'm going to hit the wall as long as I pace myself and stay on top of my nutrition. It's just a matter of how fast I can go.
Okay. Now, I mean, just basing off of everything I've read on your blog post so far, how did you pick the run shoes that you were going to pick?
Yeah, well, I chose the Nike Vaporfly 4% because, again, my attitude, my no stone unturned attitude toward preparing for this race was part of it was to use the best equipment. That's why I got the wetsuit I got. That's why I got the bike I got, the race wheels I got. That's why I paid for things like swim coaching and a bike, professional bike fitting. I wanted the best of everything. And, the studies say that the Nike Vaporfly 4% is the fastest running shoe ever created. So they cost $250. I will point out these things, these expenses are, I'm not a wealthy man, but these things are tax write-offs for me because I work in this industry. It's not a dollar for dollar thing, but it's not quite as painful as it is maybe for some athletes to spend that much on running shoes. But I bought the shoes. Their downside is that they don't last very long. So the technology, the speed comes at a cost. They only last like 100 kilometers before you have to chuck them. So I had done 2 interval workouts in them, and that half marathon that I did as a training run, I had done in them, and I loved them. They felt great on me. But for some reason in the marathon, in the Ironman, they hurt my feet. I can't really explain it. I never experienced, it wasn't like hot spots or blistering or anything like that. I just felt like all the bones in both feet were broken. I'm just running on these like bags of broken bones, and it happened early, within the first mile. So my legs felt great, but then, very soon after that, I'm like, oh, my feet do not feel great.
Wow. So knowing that you're going to have to run the whole marathon on feeling like your feet are broken, how did this change your mindset?
Well, again, I just, my whole attitude was accept the reality that is confronting you exactly as it is. Don't try and change the reality or like pretend it's anything other than it is. Just put the most positive frame you possibly can on that reality. So what I told myself in this case was like, wow, that hurts, but I don't actually think I have an injury. I think it's just pain. So all I really have to do is tolerate the pain. If I had been fearing that I had an actual injury that might end my race, that would have been much more mentally difficult to cope with. But just by telling myself, you're not injured, it's not fun to run in pain. But if like all I cared about was just being able to run well. And there was nothing about the pain I was experiencing in my feet that told me I had to slow down. I simply had to tolerate the pain. So that's what I told myself.
Okay. To get off topic a little bit, I've read your book, How Bad Do You Want It? And I think I even have an autographed copy that I bought from you. I've read that book a few times. You've had to learn a lot of tactics from the people that you interviewed from that book of how to really get to a different place mentally in a race situation. Did you use any type of those tactics that you learned or strategies you might have learned from some of the athletes you interviewed for that book?
Yeah, we've already been talking about some of them. That effort to to put up the most positive spin on what's going on that you possibly can, to just try to actively control your thoughts and emotions, and just think useful thoughts and feel helpful emotions. You have so much more control over your thoughts and emotions than you think you do. And when you realize that you have that control, you can unleash just all kinds of power. And that was really my experience of this race. I was just very conscious of how much control I had. So it was just a matter of like using my judgment to really sort of like hand pick what I was going to think about. And so, during the marathon, I, except for like a few moments, it took me 3 hours and 17 minutes to run the marathon. During those 3 hours and 17 minutes, I only had like 5 or 6 thoughts, and they were the same ones over and over. Cause I just picked like little phrases that were helpful for me, and I just repeated them in my head over and over, A, because they were helpful, and B, to keep my mind off other less helpful thoughts that would intrude. I'll just give you an example. Like, because my legs felt very good early on, I was running along and sort of just kind of seeing what I felt, how that translated to pace. And at one point I saw that I was running 650 per mile pace, which is like, it's a 259 marathon pace. And I knew I wasn't going to be able to sustain that. I felt like I could at the moment. So I just sort of consciously like took the edge off my pace, even though I felt fine. And I started telling myself, run your all day pace, run your all day pace. And that, what I meant by all day pace is like to run a pace you feel like you could sustain indefinitely. And I found that really helpful. So throughout the entire marathon, I kept going back to that. It was one of like just a small laundry list of thoughts that I just put on a loop and kept thinking over and over and over throughout the entire 26.2 miles.
Wow. So as far as the first 10 miles go, I know this is a looped course. What do you see? What are you experiencing? And are you looking around, or are you really just trying to stay within your own self and not really worry about what's going on around you? What are you doing here?
I was actually, I was both very internally and very externally focused, if that makes any sense. So yeah, I had all these thoughts going on in my head. I mean, I was just talking to myself, non-verbally, like nonstop, as I described. But at the same time, because I felt good and confident, and I knew I was going to run well, and I knew, I was getting into the later stages of the race, and I just wanted to sort of soak up the experience and enjoy it. So, I made a point of thanking every volunteer who handed me a cup of something to drink. And so, yeah, every time I grabbed a cup, I would thank the volunteer, just to have that little bit of positive interaction. And when people, there weren't a ton of spectators outside of the aid stations, but when someone cheered for me or clapped for me, I would thank them for that as well. And that just sort of added to my sense of just being like relishing the moment, you know what I mean? Just to interact with people just in those. I mean, it doesn't take much breath to say thank you to someone. It doesn't slow you down, but it gives you a positive feeling that you can sort of ride a little bit throughout the course. I had a little bit of, I was passing runners and nobody was passing me. So I was a little bit conscious of like, okay, how many people can I pass? So that competitive thing. And then there were a couple of athletes on the course who recognized me, and, just said, "Hey, are you Matt Fitzgerald?" And, "Oh, hey, I read X and such book of yours and I really liked it." And so that was really awesome too. It just, I feel sort of guilty because like, that's not an experience that most athletes can have in an Ironman. But you just get so much out of it. So I had a couple of those moments as well. So yeah, I really enjoyed the marathon. It was challenging, but the challenge was mostly something I was dealing with that, that loop of mantras I described.
Wow.
But at the same time, I'm enjoying the running. I'm enjoying the course. I'm enjoying the volunteers and the other athletes and the whole deal.
Man. So, as far as the run course goes, what is something that you would tell someone to be aware of that's doing this course in the future?
There is two-way traffic at a lot of points, so I almost hit one of the runners. He might have actually been the winner. I wouldn't have known him by sight, but one of the guys who was ahead of me and running faster, I almost hit him head on because I was passing a runner to the right on, it's like on a thin bike path, and I was directly in his right of way, and he was cool about it. He just pointed me extra to the path I belonged on. So that be aware of, because there's a head-on collisions. There are a lot of turns, so there's not a lot of elevation gain, which is good, but pins and sharper than 90-degree turns that can slow you down a bit. There's not much you can do really, technique-wise to practice for that or make the best of it. It's just something that's helpful to be aware of so that you're not, stressing about it. Yeah, that's about it.
Okay. So most people that do a marathon, they always hit the wall mile 20. It's obviously that you train for this. You've done plenty of marathons in the past. Did you hit this wall, or did you have a decrease of energy at any point in the run where it made things harder for you?
No. I just, like I said, I knew within the first 100 yards of the marathon that I wasn't going to hit any kind of wall unless I was stupid. So it was just one of these things where running the same pace gradually required more and more effort. So like 3-4 miles in, it was truly just plain easy. I'm running 7.5 minutes per mile, which is like, it's my normal easy run pace, in training. And that's really honestly what it felt like, except for the pain in my feet. And, I guess I was feeling the cycling in my legs a little bit, but I guess I've just felt so much better than expected that I'm like, this is actually kind of easy. But I wasn't stupid. I knew that didn't mean I could run a whole lot faster because, my run training was just thin. It was basically 6 weeks. So I didn't want to take any risks. And so I ran the first half marathon in, it was like, I was on 3:14 pace. So I did slow a little bit in the second half, but not too bad. I could just sort of feel I was, starting to grind a little bit. But I had plenty left for, the last mile. A little bit of a positive split. But yeah, again, it wasn't. What sucks is when you get 20 miles in and you're seriously thinking, I don't know if I'm going to implode or not. Like I never had those kinds of thoughts. No.
Wow. So, looking towards the finish line here, the last 800 yards of the race, you are turning off and you're actually going to the finish line versus going back on another loop. And then you get towards the downtown section. If I remember right, this is a very long straightaway before the finish line because you can see it for a long ways. How is this long street here in the finish line experience here?
Well, at that point, so it's the funny thing that happened was when I was in the penalty tent, I sort of made a decision to stop thinking about my time goal for the race, because I just didn't want to brood about those 5 minutes. Like I am sort of it's the track runner in me. Like I am a time geek. Like I'm every second matters to me. And I realized that with the drafting penalty, I could easily drive myself nuts thinking about like, oh my God, I'm not going to be able to achieve my goal. My goal for the race, when I sort of put together my best realistic swim, bike, and run splits and put the transitions in there, I thought I could cover the course somewhere between 9:40 and 9:45. But then, with the penalty, I just thought, stop thinking about that. Stop thinking about the time and just really go by feel and just execute. But then when I got to, within that last mile of the marathon, I realized that I could still, even despite the drafting penalty and the 7-minute T1 and the other things that had not really gone my way, I realized I could still break 9:50. And I thought, well, that's something worth fighting for. So that's what I was really thinking about. And I had plenty left for it. So I was running hard, once I left the bike path and was up on the streets. That's some fast running. If you have something left, you can, I was actually glad the finish line was far away because it gave me more time on streets that were conducive to fast running to try and take advantage of having something left. So I was just trying to I was just fighting for seconds at that point.
Wow. So you finished the race. How was the finish line experience here?
Yeah, I was ready to be done, but it's funny. Like, my brother and my two friends were there, and they congratulated me, and we just started chatting a bit. I hadn't even left. I was still in the finish area. We were just talking over a barrier. And one of them said, "Wow, it's like you didn't even do anything." And I'm like, "Oh no, trust me, trust me. I feel like I just did an Ironman, but I wasn't like about to fall down or anything like that. I just, it's just one of those things. Like I felt like I was just on top of the thing the whole way through. So I gave it everything I had. But I felt pretty good, at the finish. And I had gone on a 1 month alcohol fast before the race. So I'm like, oh man, I can't wait to have a beer, and I can't wait to just eat whatever I want. And so that's really where I was. I was just happy to be able to reconnect with my support team. And, I hadn't seen my wife since she dropped me off. She was still back at the hotel. So I was just ready to get my party on at that point. There's that euphoria that settles on you unless your race has been a total disaster. So I was like just transitioning quickly into euphoria mode because after my first Ironman, I was so wrecked I couldn't even drink a beer. So it wasn't much of a celebration. So the whole day I was comparing a lot of things I was experiencing to that first Ironman. So after finishing, I was very conscious that I felt a lot better than I did after my first Ironman. And I was happy to be done. I was happy that all things considered, it had gone well. And I was excited actually for just the fourth stage of the triathlon, which was eating and drinking and having fun with my family and friends.
Nice. So I know we're talking almost 11 days after the race here. How has your recovery process been?
Yeah. So again, comparing things to the first time, like I remember my wife had to help me out of bed the morning after Ironman Wisconsin. The funny thing is I was 31 years old then. I'm 48 now. And when I got out of bed the morning after the race, I had some pain in my Achilles, both Achilles, like lower calf Achilles areas, that was quite intense. But other than that, I felt like I could have run. Honestly, I'm like, what's going on here? Like, did I really give it all out there? I started to second guess whether I had, pushed myself hard enough. I felt, it's all relative. You know what I mean? Like a non-athlete would wake up feeling that way and say, I immediately call the doctor. But in the context of my own experience, I felt great. The funny thing was, like, after that, I didn't improve much very fast. So I didn't do any exercise. I didn't exercise at all that day. Like on the second day after the race, I thought, I'll swim. And I went to the pool and swam like literally for 9 minutes, and I just felt like death. And I got out of the pool. And I just said, bad idea. But then immediately I had to head out on this book tour that I'm sort of halfway through now. I'm going to spend a couple of weeks with my parents and then head back west. So, less than 48 hours after I finished the race, I'm starting a cross country road trip with my wife. And just a bunch of copies of my new book in the back of it. Our trusty Pooch, Queenie, who goes everywhere with us. And so with some of these events, I was giving talks and signing books at bookstores, but I also had to go for a group run. So it was just 3 days out from. Wait a minute, this is Saturday, Sunday, but yeah, 3 days out from the Ironman, I had to do a group run. I was obligated to. Like, people had come there to run with me, and I just felt absolutely terrible. We're running 9.5 minute miles, and I just had to gut it out for 30 minutes. But yeah, it was slow. I just had dead legs for a few days, but they started to come around. And then the last run I did with a group a couple days ago in Washington, D.C., I felt 100% again, and I was starting to think about, all right, I can't wait for to start preparing for my next race, and that's sort of where I am now. Like, finally, I'm out of the car. I've got 2 weeks at my parents' place, where it's actually a very nice place to run in Rhode Island, and I'm excited to get into some marathon training now.
Nice. So, looking back on it, what's something that you learned from this race that you want to pass on to someone who hasn't done this race before?
Yeah, I feel like and it's probably just come out in the way I described it, that what I hoped to do with my mind in the race worked out exactly well as I'd hoped. And I just think that other athletes should approach races the same way, just to remind yourself how much control you have. You don't have to necessarily choose the same mantra I chose, but just to know, like, you can choose your thoughts and emotions. Maybe not your first thought after a setback, but once you process something that doesn't go your way, or you process the fact that it's getting hard, and then you just think, okay, what is the most positive frame I can put around this? What's the most helpful thought I can think now? What is the most useful emotion that I can focus on? Because at any given moment in any race, there are 12 different things going on, and not all of them are bad. No matter what, not all of them are bad. Even if it's just the weather that's good, focus on that, honestly. It just makes a big difference in terms of how you experience the race, like how much fun you have doing it. But it affects your performance too. So I didn't have a perfect race. I made some mistakes and I had some bad luck. But the one thing I think I did do perfectly was, just make my mind, the contents of my mind, advantageous to my experience and my performance. And that is something that anyone can do. Anyone. You have to have some intentionality about it. You can't just go in hoping your mind works for you. You have to sort of, have a plan for it.
Okay. So, Matt, we covered a lot about your race. Do you have anything else you want to add about the race?
Not really. I'll add that I did not achieve my goal of qualifying for the World Championship. My age group was just super competitive. My time would have qualified most other years, but you can't control who shows up. So I did beat the time from my previous Ironman, and I did throw out the drafting penalty. I did cover the course in 9 hours and 43 minutes, which was right within that window of what I thought I could do, that's very satisfying. So yeah, just for people who care about the numbers, I was 7th in my age group and 50th overall in the race.
Wow. Now, moving forward, what's next?
Yeah, so in the fall, I really am a runner first. I definitely plan to do another Ironman, and I'd also like to do the sprint national championships when I'm 50, or when I'm able to race in the 50 to 54 age group. So that's a couple of years off. Um, but I started running so well in those 6 weeks before the race, when I was able to kind of take the shackles off, that I really got excited to do another marathon. So in the fall, I'm going to do what I'm calling a kamikaze marathon, and that's sort of in the spirit of what Eliud Kipchoge's doing with the great Kenyan runner with his sub 2 hour marathon attempts. A kamikaze marathon is when you just pick a time that is at the very outer limits of what might be possible for you, and then you figure out what pace per mile is associated with that time, and then you pick a marathon, and you just, unlike a normal marathon where you sort of adjust along the way so that you don't blow up, you just stubbornly insist on running every mile at that pace until you blow up. And of course, you hope you get all the way to the finish, but you accept going into it that you have less than 50% chance of making it all the way. So it's something that you would only want to do as an experienced runner, and kind of as a lark almost. It's just, you just accept that, you will probably unravel somewhere between 20 and 26 miles, but there's a chance you'll actually do something really special that you might not be able to achieve unless you took that kind of risk. So Eliud Kipchoge is taking his second crack at a sub 2 hour marathon this fall. So I'm going to do a marathon around the same time frame. I'm going to be running a minute and a half per mile slower, but I'm going to attempt to sustain 6 minutes and 4 seconds per mile for the full marathon, which would be 1 second per mile faster than my previous best. And of course, at age 48, that's a pretty big ask. So, I will probably fail, but they won't really be failure if I just enjoy the whole adventure. And it's something, again, I intend to sort of share the journey with others along the way through Strava and my blog and social media. And also, I'm going to try and encourage other people to take on a kamikaze marathon this fall. Like, just wherever, you can choose any event in which to attempt such a thing. And maybe we can get a whole bunch of people around the country, even around the world, just taking a shot at the near impossible.
So what you're basically wanting people to do is face their fears and go after it.
Yeah. Again, it's not, as a coach, I would generally tell athletes, don't do that. But again, for someone who's experienced and just kind of understands the spirit of it, and just wants to, just wants to go for it. I think it's a fun way to approach the marathon.
Wow. So I only have really two more questions for you, and that's first, you have a new book out, Life is a Marathon. You can get it on Amazon, your website. Tell me a little bit more about the book.
Yeah, so Life is a Marathon is it's really a celebration of what I describe as the uncanny transformative power of testing your mental and physical limits as an endurance athlete. Anyone who's taken this journey knows that being an endurance athlete changes who you are. I mean, you change as a person, and it actually it can lead you onto a different, richer life path than you would have taken if you hadn't become an athlete. And that's been my experience. And in the book, I talk about a lot about my relationship with my wife, Nataki, who developed bipolar disorder after we'd been married for a couple of years. And it was just by far, the hardest thing I've ever experienced. Obviously, she has the disease, but as her husband and primary caregiver, it turned my world upside down too. And in the book, I just talk a lot about how the transformation I have experienced as an athlete gave me the strength and the resilience to really survive that and do a better job in my role than I would have done otherwise. The book also describes a previous cross-country trip that Nataki and I took together when I ran 8 marathons in 8 weeks, each in a different part of the country. And I met tons of other athletes on that journey and heard their stories, and I sort of weave them into the book as well, so that, again, the thing is just a really sort of a deep dive into that magic. What is it about testing your mental and physical limits through endurance that can really turn you into a better version of yourself.
Wow. Matt, you've been in the sport for many, many years. You've done plenty of races. and I'm sure you've been asked this before, but what races are still on your bucket list? Do you have any race that you want to still experience that you haven't yet?
Oh yeah, I'm not sure it's so much a bucket list. I guess there are some. I would love to, like, for example, run the New York City Marathon. Oddly, Kona is not really a bucket list thing for me. I've covered it as a journalist. That course doesn't really suit me too much. I would like to do it someday, but it's not really something like I dream of the way a lot of other athletes do. But a lot of the races I haven't done that I would like to do might even be races I have never even heard of. Like, one of my favorite race experiences ever was a marathon I did in Kenya. It was basically a safari without the Jeep. And it was just kind of just a random thing that I fell into that was just awesome. And I would love to have more experiences like that where it's not necessarily, a race that everyone knows about that I've wanted to do for a long time. Like, yes, there are some races like that I want to do. But I want to be sort of surprised by some of my future competitive adventures.
Nice. So, Matt, how can people follow you?
There's my website, which is mattfitzgerald.org, and I am on Twitter at mattfitwriter. I'm on Instagram, fitzgerald.matt. I'm also on Facebook, all those places.
Nice. So, Matt, I only have one more question for you, and that's, what's your definition of a perfect race?
Yeah, I would say, it's really a feeling. If you complete a race and you look back on it, and just feel great about the whole thing, sort of regardless of the numbers or the details of execution or how true it might be that you could have gained a second or two by doing this or that differently. If you look back on that race, a week after, a month after, a year after, a decade after, and just feel good about the whole thing, that was a perfect race.
Have you had one?
Gosh. I'll say no. I've come very, very close, but perfect, man, that's a high bar.
Well, Matt, I would love to share a picture or two that you have from this race experience. I hope someone did take a picture. If you would you mind sending me one so that way I could post up on Instagram, tag you in it, and share your story on my website?
Of course. Happy to do that.
Awesome. Well, Matt, thank you again for your time. I've really enjoyed this, and I look forward to following your journey.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. Have a good day, okay?
All right.
Thanks for tuning in today. I hope you were able to learn something from today's episode. If you enjoyed the show, please take a minute to leave a review on iTunes or share it with a friend. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. If you'd like to see pictures from this athlete's race, learn more about who I am, what I'm doing, or be on the show yourself to share your story, check out my website at CoachTerryWilson.com. Until next time, continue the pursuit.